Welcome back to Season 3 of the Sober Motivation Podcast. Join me, Brad, each week as my guests and I share incredible and powerful sobriety stories. We are here to show sobriety is possible, one story at a time. Let's go. How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast, our first episode of 2025. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel like 2025 is going to be a great year. A lot of great stuff happening. I feel like it's going to be the year of living an authentic life, pursuing the goals that we have for ourselves, whether it be in sobriety, in other areas of our life. I feel like it's going to be the year of less excuses, less of why we don't deserve or why we can't do things that we've always wanted to do. I feel like it's going to be the year where we have to lead with kindness in all of our interactions, and also the year where we reach back into the fire and help the next person struggling. That's what I always visioned this podcast to be. A place that's safe for people to land without expectation of getting sober today or tomorrow, but a place where they could come hear stories and maybe find one that relates to theirs. And if we can offer a sliver of hope that if this guest was able to find a way out, maybe the listener on the other side could too. I'm excited for you guys. I'm excited for us to hang out in 2025. I'm excited to bring you guys a bunch more stories here on the podcast. I'm really excited for all of you that have joined the Sober Motivation community, which we are still offering 1 month free for anybody who wants to join, plug into the live meetings, a community that's just incredible. It does all of those things that I mentioned above. It accepts people where they're at. I think one of the biggest things that I struggled with when thinking about and considering and trying to get sober was everything felt like all or nothing. If I wasn't staying completely sober, then I was failing at the task at hand. It seemed like everybody's expectation around me was to stay sober, and that was the goal. And if I was short of that at all, it was just complete failure altogether. What I've realized since doing this, working with people and talking with people and supporting people, is that we all have a very unique journey of how we internalize our struggles and how we decide to approach them. And one thing stands. Sober people just tried one more time. You don't hear the story every day where somebody tried their first time and everything worked out from that point onward. It's a very rare story in the community, I think. Of course, it's out there. But the more common story you hear is get up, fall down, scrape your knees a little bit, get back up, figure out what didn't work, repeat the process. And it's very tough to go through that. But I just want to throw it out there heading into 2025. No matter where you're at in your journey, just keep going. Just keep showing up. And there's one suggestion, if I could make it, get plugged in with other people that are on this journey. Whether that be online, in person, at church, a therapist, some group therapy, something. Get plugged in. Because that's going to make all the difference. You're not alone. You're not alone. You're not strange. You're not weird. You're not a failure. Because you're struggling with something that a lot of us have struggled with. Like 2025, we've got to make more ground on the shame and the secrecy that's involved with struggling with drinking, with drug use, with all of this. And we have to come together and say, you know what? We've been there. We get it. It's difficult, but it's also possible. Now let's check out the intro for this episode to start 2025. Thank you guys as always for supporting the podcast, and I love having you. In this episode, we have Ben, a pastor from South Georgia who shares his life story marked by childhood challenges, struggles with perfectionism, and eventually alcohol addiction. Ben discusses growing up in a tumultuous household, his late start with drinking at nearly 21, and how alcohol became both a coping mechanism and a source of shame. He talks about the moment that led him to seek sobriety in January 2022. Tune into Ben's amazing story of recovery and newfound gratitude that has transformed his life. And this is Ben's story on the Sober Motivation Podcast. I want to give a huge shout out to this episode's sponsor, an app called My Dry 30. My Dry 30 is incredible. In just 15 minutes of hypnotherapy, 10 minutes of journaling, and 5 minutes of reading each day inside the app, It can help you achieve your goals when it comes to not drinking. Check out the app today. It's completely free in the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. And it's going to answer the big question for you. What if alcohol is the one thing holding you back from being your best self, from your true self? Check out the app today, My Dry 30. It's a 30-day app challenge to rethink alcohol using hypnotherapy, journaling, and quick reads. There's also really cool motivational videos. I'll drop the link to download the app down in the show notes, or you can just search your favorite app store, My Dry 30. Welcome back to another episode of the Sober Motivation Podcast. We've got Ben with us today. Ben, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. We were just chatting before we hit record here. This is my first session anyway, back after the holidays. So I'm happy to be back and so happy for you to join us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Absolutely.
Of course. So what was it like for you growing up?
For me growing up, I'm from South Georgia, if you can't tell by my accent. And I was just a typical church kid growing up. We did church, school, baseball, all that kind of stuff. I think the stuff that I've processed that's been more difficult later in my adulthood is the other things, like my parents who argued constantly, my father who suffered from manic depression and bipolar disorder, his attempted suicide, the fact that he left us when I was 12, and then my mom became a single mom, So on the outside, it was very much your typical growing up kind of thing. But a lot of that was forced and created to cope, I guess, with the tough realities of a difficult home life. So yeah, I think like a lot of people, if we're being rigorously honest with ourselves, it was a mixture of wonderful things and pretty difficult things.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Do you have
siblings? I have a sister who is 18 months younger than me, which is, almost twins because you don't remember life without them. She was one grade behind me, and we were the best of friends and the worst of enemies.
Yeah. So growing up with that type of environment you just described for us a little bit there, how did that impact like your life in school and relationships, and how did those things look for you?
So, I was the good child, the older child, the one who wanted to be perfect at all things and make everybody happy. My sister was a little bit more of the wild child who was more authentic, but explored life a little bit. For as long as I could remember, I was very uncomfortable in my own skin. I didn't quite know who I was, and I just knew that I wanted people to be happy with me. So it probably had a huge effect on relationships and all that kind of thing. Part of the reason I'm a pastor, and if I'm being honest, part of the reason I probably went that route was because it pleased my mother that I would pursue such a thing. Thankfully, I did come to realize that it was something that did speak deeply to my own soul. But yeah, some of those dynamics had a tremendous impact growing up.
When did you start drinking? Was it a high school thing for you or no?
I was almost 21 because I was such a perfect child and had a teetotaling mother that we didn't touch alcohol because it was such a naughty thing to do. I remember I was almost 21. I went with some friends who were already going to bars. I surprised them by showing up at the bar because they just thought, well, Ben doesn't come to this place. And then I showed up and they're like, oh my gosh. I remember my first drink because that warm relaxation that washes over you like a cool wave. It was the first time in a group setting like that I finally felt comfortable and relaxed. And I thought, this is magic. This is what I've been looking for my whole life, to feel comfortable. So yeah, and then once I started, it was like the switch flipped and we were off to the races.
Yeah. How did you feel though, especially sharing there that you grew up with a different perspective of alcohol not really being around, and then now you've had your first drink and you felt this way about it? Did you have any like internal battle of, I'm enjoying it, but know better, I shouldn't be? Or what did that look like?
Yeah, I think shame was always a part of drinking for me. And as I aged and became a parent and was just a nightly drinker, a heavy drinker, I struggled with shame in many aspects of my life because shame was weaponized when I was a kid. And so it just comes, anything you do that's not perfect, you carry a tremendous amount of shame. But yeah, I carried shame for that. At the same time, it felt really good to rebel. It felt really good to finally break free of such a strict, household. So it was a weird thing. I loved it and hated it all at once, which I think Now that I'm in recovery and talk to people, they're like, oh, that's typical. Most of us love and hate it.
Yeah. I think like for me, I loved it until I realized I couldn't stop drinking. And
Right.
then it was like, now I hate it, but now I'm in this like this middle ground where I want to stop, but I can't stop. Going back to the other part of your story there with your, yeah, I think you mentioned there your dad kind of left home, and then your mom was a single parent. I mean, how was that for you? Like that transition?
I was 12, and 12 I've learned now through therapy and things. 12 is a very important pivotal age for young men, for all kids, but young men is uniquely pivotal. It was difficult. I mean, there's still wounds there that I'm trying to work out in how I'm trying to be a father and a husband. And I would say both of my parents, I mean, struggled with it. My dad was an alcoholic who my mom forbid to drink. And a buddy in recovery told me, he said, man, there ain't nothing worse than being an alcoholic who's not allowed to drink. Like, that's awful. And that's how he lived. And so there was a lot of resentment and things like that. So it was hard. And even trying to come to terms with, if you have a parent leave, there's a lot of resentment and hatred that we can have, which is totally normal. I think I'm coming to the place where I'm also acknowledging the deeper hurt, which is, why didn't he let me love him the way that I wanted to love him? Because imperfect as your parents are, it's still your daddy, it's still your mama. And you want them to be better and let you love them, and you want them to love you in good ways. And so I think that's the deeper under the resentment and the difficulty there, that I'm finally at 40, dealing with that piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's sort of the work that we do after the fact. I think if we go back to 12, like when I'm thinking back to 12, I don't have too many memories of probably when I was exactly 12, but I knew a lot of things were going on, but I just didn't have the tools or feel like I had, somewhere to channel it or comfortable, or, it's kind of like you just get stuck in that routine.
I grew up way too fast. And I remember being told by my mom and others, well, you're the man of the house now. And it's only been in my adulthood that I've realized there's nothing worse you can put on a 12-year-old kid than to say, time for you to grow up. No, you need to be a 12-year-old kid. You need to go through the adolescence of that. And so a big piece of my childhood kind of evaporated when he left.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff, especially the expectation too of being the man of the house, right?
Oh, yeah.
Too. And yeah. So back up to where you had your first drink and you surprised everybody at the bar there and everything. I mean, it sounds like it anyway. You fell in love with the escape that alcohol provides us for, the insecurities kind of drop. It was the same thing for me. I was carrying around this heavy backpack of expectations to do well in school, be a good kid. And I was like the complete opposite of sort of what you're sharing here. I was the troublemaker, getting arrested in high school, on probation, failing all my classes, running away from home, causing complete destruction. And everybody around me, my parents, people that supported me, just they weren't expecting the moon, but they were like, come on, can we just kind of get these basics down? And I was always pushing it back. And then when I started drinking, it was just like, man, everything that maybe I didn't even realize I was struggling with kind of just slid off my shoulders, and the world felt a lot less heavy as it did before. Yeah. So you kind of, share that maybe in a different way. How do things go from you, for there? You graduate high school and everything. I mean, do you go to college right after high school, or how did that look?
Oh, yeah. I had to go to college, went to graduate school, did all the things that, you do to be successful. And this was my little secret, that for all the, like what you just described, even though we kind of had two different approaches, I think we're both voicing the same thing, which is someone says, do you have a problem with alcohol? And I want to say, no, alcohol was the solution to my problems. My problems were way deeper than all of that, but alcohol helped fix it until it couldn't do it anymore. So I did all the right things and lived at this almost internal fever pitch of pressure. And I said that the drinking, and for me, was like releasing a pressure valve, or almost, sort of walking into an elevator chute and just hitting a button, and it's your escape hatch. You just kind of escape for the night. You'll be back the next morning. You'll deal with the expectations. You'll try to be perfect for everybody. Let's take a break from that. And that's what alcohol did for me. And so it progressively became more and more. When I was in college, it was just a lot of beer, liquor here and there. But as I got older and wanted to be sophisticated and, got a job and post grad school and I could afford things like good bourbon and gin. And, that's what sophisticated friends did. And we'd had bourbon tastings and all that. Nobody realized though that while they were like sipping, I was guzzling. you know, I didn't understand why anyone didn't feel this intense, let's get after this, even in casual settings. So yeah, I mean yeah, I feel you.
Yeah. It's so interesting too that like I picked up on it probably fairly early on that I drank different than my peers. Like
Yeah.
my motivation about it was drink, just try to get to that buzz as fast as possible as to
Yeah.
where, yeah, I mean, there were some people like that I associated with, but like most people seemed like they were just pacing things, enjoying the parties, especially in
Yeah.
college, enjoying the company, like trying to stay somewhat coherent to, whatever it was, flirt with girls or, whatever people wanted to do, play the drinking games. But for me, it was just as fast as I could get it going. And was there a time for you where you had any insight to, like maybe this looks a little bit different than other people around me?
Yeah. So I said I'm a pastor and I was the cool pastor. I'm the pastor who'll go have a drink or two with you. And I realized at some point that I felt pressure because I couldn't drink too much with people who saw me as a pastor. But it was I would find myself like almost fidgety to finish that happy hour meeting so I could get home and drink the way I wanted to drink. So yeah, I can always have one or two and restrain myself when I have the pastor hat on. But then when I get home, we're going to get after this. And so, I knew that was different and weird. I knew if I ever traveled for meetings, I always knew that I drank harder when I was by myself. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but looking back when recovery friends gave me language that we do our best drinking when we're by ourselves because nobody's there to judge us. Nobody's there to say, hey, isn't that a little, oh, hell no, let's do this thing. So I knew that was weird. The other thing that I think about, probably about 6 months before I finally got sober, I would wake up just, feeling like a car had hit me from the night before. That was just a typical Tuesday night. And I would Google, how many drinks makes you an alcoholic? And so I knew logically there was something wrong, but I was trying to Google, does this make me an alcoholic? And now I realize if you have to Google your drinking habits, you got a problem with your drinking habits.
Yeah, that is so true. I had one person, and I always love this story because I think so many of us have been there for the Google thing, where she shared on the podcast that she Googled it and then it, somewhere she landed on a questionnaire, but then
Yeah.
wasn't honest with the questionnaire. And
Oh,
she, looking back, it's like, whoa, red flag, right? It's just a questionnaire with ourselves. So interesting, right? Because I think obviously in the day and age of Google, I've heard that story countless times about how many of us end up there to figure out, ask some questions about our drinking. And I think for sure there's definitely something there to be looked at a little bit deeper if we're plugging into to Google to, look at or figure out how to moderate too. I think that's another one, right? Like how do we,
yeah.
then I could switch to this or switch to that or have a little bit less of a hangover in the morning, have give all kind of ideas.
Yeah. At one point, I was like, oh, bourbon, that's my downfall. So let's keep some gin. So, because I drink bourbon way too fast. And then it was like, well, now I'm drinking both bourbon and gin at night. And then it was like, well, let's have wine. Wine's a step back. Well, then I'm having bourbon, gin, and some wine. The moderation, it's a form of our insanity.
Yeah.
It's insane how hard we work and how much emotional and brain power we use to try to configure what's the right calibration when it's just, I got a problem.
Yeah. No, I'm with you 100%. So you finish up school and I mean, you did well in school though, go to graduate school, do school. So, I mean, at this point in your life, other than, probably internally, right? Knowing that, waking up not feeling great and a little bit of that, I should not be doing this, but I'm doing this. Other than maybe that stuff, like this isn't really bleeding out into other areas of your life, or is it?
I was beginning to have some health issues. I was beginning to have some memory lapses, some wet brain type stuff. I was beginning to have these moments where my wife and I would, we'd watch whatever we're binging on Netflix, right? And of course, she's having 2 glasses of wine and she doesn't realize because I'm talking so much and moving that I'm having 6 and 8, drinks in that same time period. And the next day she would recount something and I would kind of look funny. And she'd go, "You don't remember we," and so I was beginning to have some things that were setting in that I knew I wasn't thinking right. My brain wasn't working right. My memory was starting to have some big lapses in there. I don't know what would have happened had I kept drinking. I was a nightly drinker, a heavy drinker every night. And I mean, I wasn't a binger per se, but I was a consistent show up at 8:30 p.m. and I'm sitting down with a drink every night and I'm going till midnight. I don't know what would have happened because I took my perfectionism so seriously to be a husband and a father and a pastor. That said, I don't know if it would have been that I would have failed at those things or if I would have gotten a medical diagnosis, like cirrhosis of the liver or, some other liver issue or brain issue or something that would have, done it. But I physically was beginning to slowly deteriorate. Yeah.
Yeah. When did that, if you kind of have an idea, when did the daily drinking start for you? Was it always that way since you started?
No, I think honestly, if I'm being truly honest, the daily drinking started about the time my wife got pregnant with our first child. And part of that was I was acting out because I loved going out and being social and all of that. And, your spouse gets pregnant and your life, and then you have a baby, your life gets very centralized at home. It's like boot camp. You're lucky to get 4 hours of sleep and all that kind of stuff. And that was my way of selfishly holding on to something that I thought was mine is I would drink. And then it just, well, I don't know. It's almost hard to pinpoint a moment because I just look back and go, when was the last night I was sober? Oh, yeah. And you can't remember. And so then it just kind of grew from there. I tried to do like a dry January in 2020, and I actually did it. And then, of course, 2020 and the pandemic, and then it was just off the rails and probably drank more from 2020 to the end of 2021. And my sobriety date is January 1, 2022. But those 2 years, I probably drank more than I drank in my life.
Yeah, that's a story that, I mean, especially throughout, the COVID time, a lot of people that have come on the podcast, they've shared, things really ramped up because our connection, our routines, a lot of the stuff we were used to doing is at home, and the drinking went from, would it be 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock, went to 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and, just kind of kept creeping back for people. So you have kids, you have 2 kids?
I do. I have 2 kids. I have a almost 13-year-old daughter and a 7.5-year-old son.
Wow. Great stuff. And so did that change anything too when they were born for you? I mean, now it's, things kind of change a little, like you mentioned there too, right? I mean, does that kind of add to how you're feeling about your drinking, the shame and everything that's kind of built into it?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I have got stories of passing out on the couch. My wife is a nurse and she's a nurse practitioner now, but she was a floor nurse early on and she would work the night shift. And so I was the only one on duty with the baby. And I mean, I've got stories of passing out essentially on the couch and my toddler has a bad dream and she wakes up and she comes looking for me. And of course she goes to my room where daddy's supposed to be at 2 a.m. But then she almost instinctively knew because that's just where I always ended up to come out in the living room where I was passed out from drinking and watching TV. And she wakes me up and just the flood of shame when your baby comes out, crying, looking for you and you're trying to pull it together and you're too drunk, oh yeah. So I feel a tremendous amount of shame for that. It was a little bit different with my son because my wife wasn't working on the floor as a nurse anymore, but it was definitely, there's a lot of shame for some of those early baby nightly calls, when babies need you. And I'm not able. I mean, there's one story in particular. I remember that my son was having a rough night and my wife had gotten up like 2 or 3 times. And she finally said, "Could you please get up this time?" And I go to get up and I was still so drunk that I fell and hit my head. And my wife is a very patient woman who was not ashamed. My mother could be a travel agent for shame trips. Sometimes my wife is not that way. But I remember looking up and my wife going, "Are you really this drunk?" And then she went to go take care of them. And yeah, there's a lot of shame for some of those nights for sure.
Yeah. With that story too, just kind of going from there, was your wife mentioning anything to you, or like, how did that go?
Every now and then, what she didn't understand was the brain power I would have to use to make arrangements to get booze whenever we traveled. That was something she goes, why do we have to stop and get something? Why do you have to go out and get something just because we're traveling? And she didn't understand that piece. Luckily, I was not a mean drunk. I was actually more fun and funny. Like I said, it made me comfortable and loosen up a little bit. So that part was okay. It was the memory stuff she started saying stuff about. It was the frequency with which, she realized I was going to the liquor store. But truly, for any of us who have kept it a secret, or worked to do that, there were things she didn't know that I made amends for later, that I just said, you need to know, like, I was refilling liquor bottles at the beach, and we would this is our weekly allotment. Well, I was running out 2 days later and I was going down there and getting shot bottles. And when you weren't looking, refilling them, sneaking around, I'd say, you go to the bathroom and I'm tiptoeing to refill my cup and top it off, all these things. And so she was surprised, I think, by some of that too. So yeah, a little bit, but she also, I don't think, realized how bad it was.
Yeah. And that's another thing you bring up there that I think a lot of us like end up in that spot too, where we've lost complete control of this thing and we don't want that to get out for other people. And it's, for me anyway, it was kind of like that denial thing. I was with you too when you shared that other thing where you would put on your hat for being a pastor and put on your hat and you'd go and have 2 drinks or whatever it was. You're able to do that. I hated that, going over to buddies' places. I've shared on the show before. My buddy was just drinking far too slow. And I'm thinking, man, just cut the conversation, get back to your fridge. At one point in my life, I still had those manners. So I didn't want to, help myself to his beer fridge, but I'm just thinking, come on, let's just get going. Let's get something going here. We need 3 or 4, and then we can have our chat after that a little bit more. But we do a lot of it alone. That's a big story. We do a lot of it alone. And a lot of people share it on the show and wait for their wife or their partner or whatever to go to bed, and then carry on and have the drinks, and then maybe take the bottles out, feel the shame around the recycling bin, clink, clink, but then take them. Some people load them up in their car and take the bottles other places. So
I would do it. I would go to the other room and I began to watch TV by myself because I just wanted to be alone. I mean, I was isolating in doing that, but I absolutely, what you just said, I just had a flashback to our cabinet where I would hide empty bottles and pull full bottles out so that it wouldn't look like, so I would throw them away all at once, because if I had an empty bottle every night sitting in the recycling, she would know how much I'm drinking. So you just hide the empty bottle back there where she can't see it, and you just pull the more full bottle. So it just looks like you had 1 or 2, but there's this whole manipulation system that you have to be mindful of. And then I can remember she would, one of the worst habits I would get into, or little secrets, she would say, okay, I'm going to bed now. We watch her program or whatever. And I'd say, I'm going to go have a snack. And now I did go have snacks, which was terrible for you, but it was part of that was to try to help the hangover. But it was also where I would then take my same tumbler and fill it up about 3 more times with wine. That box wine is like never ending wine. And I would just fill it up 3 times and I would carry on for a whole nother hour in the kitchen and just get drunk. And I don't know, different people, like, there's a whole range of emotions because alcohol helps us find those feelings that are hard to find. I would be fun until I just felt like I needed to be sad. And I can remember late nights, sometimes I would watch YouTube videos that I knew would make me cry. And I would do it on purpose just so I could drink and cry. And it just, thinking back, it sounds so pathetic, but I didn't know what to do with these feelings. And that was the only way to get them out, was to get drunk enough to finally get them out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it too. I mean, you'll see that with a lot of people for drinking too. I think it shifts, right? Where it's like fun, exciting, involved, and then it's like the sadness comes out too afterwards, right? So, yeah. So I mean, I'm really curious too. You've obviously done a lot of work in this direction with things, and you kind of mentioned there too with your wife. It's kind of like we got the people around us fooled. Now, I think they're a lot smarter than maybe we realize at the time when we're going through it, right? It's like, this trick, that trick, and they probably know. What was the effect on yourself, though? I mean, because I think for some of us anyway, there's an element of denial. I mean, we're doing all this stuff. When we look back into it through this clear lens of sobriety, it just screams insanity. It just screams red flags. But when we're going through it, I mean, was that something you experienced too? Of it just becomes kind of normal?
Yes, very normal. It's just what I did. It's what grown-ups did. It's what we did to relieve pressure. It was the one thing I looked forward to every day. The tightness in my neck would start at about 5 o'clock, but I was like, you can't drink this early. But for some reason, I invented 8:30 as a time. But I think that was about when my kids went to bed because I didn't want them to see me doing this either. But that was like clockwork. 8:30 hits and I've got a drink in my hand. But it just became so normal. I mean, that's the piece of I didn't like the way I felt the next morning and the shame spiral and all of that. And yet I would magically find myself right back in that same scenario that night, forgetting all the shame I'd felt that morning and just right back into the routine because it's almost like you don't know another way.
Yeah. So things for you. I mean, you ended up putting down the drinking in January of 22, right?
January 1st, 2022. I'm a cliche.
The
But
first
yeah,
too.
and
Wow.
New Year's Day, I did it. Yeah.
So we're bringing us back there, like a couple weeks leading up to that. I mean, what are your thoughts going into this? I mean, was this something you had planned out? What did it look like for you?
Good question. So I'm a pastor, and that month leading up to the new year is a very busy time for pastors, church and pressure and festivities and all of these things. And I would drink really heavily. And the truth is, my birthday's in mid-November, and I would tell people that those 6 weeks to the end of the year were just nonstop because it would be part celebration with my birthday. It would be part coping because then there's Thanksgiving and family that, things aren't great with sometimes. Then it's part stress drinking because you got all the different activities and everybody wants you to come to their party and all these things. Exhaustion, celebration. It was like this never ending, bouncing around all these different feelings. But it would be about 6 weeks through New Year's of just almost you could like I can wake up and almost smell myself in the booze, coming out of me kind of thing. I knew I needed to cut back and but I was too smart. And so I said, I did a dry January that one time. Let me do one again. And so I didn't realize the pink cloud effect that would set in about 2 weeks into it. And so I sort of took it month by month for about 2 months, but I was white knuckling the whole time. I mean, I started going to bed at 9 o'clock at night because I was afraid to stay up late for fear that I would drink. Couple months into it, I realized I was at a thing and drinks were being had, and I'd been about 3 months sober, which meant I got, all the physical dependency, should have been shaken by then. And I found myself playing the tape, as they say. When someone said, well, do you want to have a drink? It's been a while for you. And I played the tape, and I immediately, without even realizing it, played it all the way. I was traveling, so I was out of town I'm going to drink here, then I'm going to go to the liquor store, then I'm going to go back to my hotel by myself. And I knew where that story ended. And in that moment, it was almost like one of those scenes from a TV show where the main character has a flashback. I realized I had got a problem. Normal people do not stress out like this over being offered one drink. And so it was then that I called a friend who is in a recovery program, and I said, hey, I'd like to go to a meeting with you because I think I've got a real thing here. Something in that moment just did not set well with me. And I realized this is heavier than just a dry January.
Interesting. Yeah. 3 months into it. So did anybody else know that you were doing this to begin with? Did you tell anybody?
My wife knew. And then I told one or two friends, I'm trying to, cut back or however we rationalize it out. But no, I was very secretive about it. And part of that is the shame of realizing if I tell someone and then I go back and drink again, there's the whole embarrassment of I'm a failure at this. And so I didn't really quite know what was wrong. I knew that not drinking was beginning to make me feel better quickly. And like I said, I was having health problems and things that were really beginning to suck the life out of me. And they were almost instantly feeling better. So I knew that was good, but I was slow to come around to the notion of recovery as a lifestyle.
Yeah. So more of the early approach of if I just remove the booze, then life will be grand and I'll be kind of on my way. It's so interesting too, because I think when a lot of us get into this, right, that's our thing, right? We see alcohol as this being the problem. And
Right.
if it's kind of like if there's a nail in my tire and I remove the nail and patch it, well, my tires, it's good. But with alcohol, if we remove alcohol, then we're left with self. We're left with
That's right.
ourself. And then if we go back
Yeah.
to, just hearing, and I'm sure there's so many more layers to your story, but just hearing how it was growing up and
Yeah.
this perfectionism thing, which I hear a ton on the podcast. I can't personally relate to that, like in any way. I'm more of like done is better than perfect. That's sort of my thing. But I get it though, how it can really creep into areas of our life. And then, you have all of that stuff that's kind of leading up to drinking is the solution, like you kind of hinted on earlier. And then we remove the alcohol and then we're expecting like everything just to be,
Yeah.
gravy. And, I'm sure there are people out there who they do that and things look good, but then there's other people where we have to continuously work. And like you mentioned there, live a sober lifestyle and
Yeah.
change our lifestyle, change the people, places and things that we hang out. We're not going to fit into all of those, old things, right? I've rarely seen this work for somebody who puts down the alcohol, but still does everything that they used to do, a year later, right?
Yeah.
Like most of the time we lose interest, right? Me anyway, I get really bored places where people are doing a lot of drinking. I can go for a bit, but then after a while, I'm so bored of hearing the same stuff over and over again. So at 3 months though, you're like, okay, there's something kind of more to this, maybe more to the story. And then you explore, connecting with other people. And did you find that's really helped you get to where you are now, where you're really good at identifying, sort of what was going on?
Yeah. I found a 12-step recovery program that clicked for me, got a sponsor, the whole nine yards. And for me, and I know everyone finds people in recovery can find recovery in any number of ways. And God love you. I mean, whatever helps you stay sober is great. But I know what worked for me. And it was taking on a program of recovery, practicing principles in all of our affairs, trying to live a sober life. And the big piece of that is just trying to discover what does it mean to be emotionally sober. It's one thing to be, physically sober, but it's like the big book says we can be dry drunks too. Your ego and self-will and all these things that were I had the biggest ego in the world. I was a perfectionist because I was going to be the greatest at everything. It didn't matter. And I would do whatever it took to be the best. And to realize how much of my self-will and my ego and, the lack of humility and all of that, that played into that. And then trying to be honest about it and deal with it in a way that says, like you said, to change people, places, and where we hang out, it's also changing how we show up. How do I show up in my everyday life? Do I show up as a person full of ego and self-will, or do I try to show up as something different? And for me, that requires that I stay sober, that I try to pray every day to ask for these things because they don't come naturally. I won't show up as that big egotistical personality, but I have to pray for acceptance and for this notion of letting go and letting life come to me and trusting that God's going to lead me there and all those things. So, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's why recovery is a daily journey. We're sober one day at a time. I just turned 3 years sober. And, as a friend reminded me, you're not 20 years sober yet, and you won't be until you hit 20 years. And so I don't have to worry about being 20 years sober. I can just be 3 years sober today. And then hopefully tomorrow I'll pray again and live a life and all the things, and I'll be sober another day. So yeah.
Yeah. It's all those other things that have to change as well. Going back to working with the church, how did that process shape up for you in kind of how did you approach that? Because you've mentioned it before and we chatted a little bit, in email before too, right? Harboring that secret and
Right.
and feeling like we have to keep it. I mean, we talked to before about the full-time job, right? Not only just making sure we have enough to drink, but also making sure that nobody else picks up on how much we are drinking. it really keeps us busy. So how were you able to work through that? When did you, bring this to everybody, if that's something you did, or yeah, what was that like?
So I was about 14 months sober, and before I said anything publicly, I nurtured my recovery like a newborn baby. You know how, like, when you have that new baby, you don't take them places because you're afraid they're going to catch something, and all of that, and they haven't had all their immunizations yet, so let's be real careful and wash hands. And that's how I treated my recovery. A friend of mine who's also a pastor, who has been sober 20 years, said to me when I turned a year sober, he said, Ben, you're going to want to say something at some point. I don't know when, and God will tell you when and all that kind of stuff. But you have a story to share, and you have no idea who might need to hear it. And so I did. I happened to, being that I have a job where I talk for 15 minutes a week with undivided attention, I preached a sermon series for Lent one year, that season where we give up things. I did a sermon series on the 12 steps and kind of broke them up, weekly leading up to Easter. And I just decided that in the first one that I would preach on the first step, and, just made mention that I know some of these things are true because I'm a person who's in recovery. I'm 14 months sober. And you may not know that, but I feel like I should share that with you. I will say I know pastors who have done that and it caused real issues for them. I am very blessed by some wonderful, open-minded, compassionate, caring people in my church who, some of them kind of shrugged and said, okay. I have people who are in recovery in my church, and they rallied behind me like I don't even have words for the graciousness that they had for me. So I've been lucky that I could be that authentic and that honest about something that was my terrible, deep, dark secret, and it be received in such a loving way, because that's not always true for everybody. And it's amazing, by the way, how many unique opportunities since I did that over the last, year and a half or so since I shared that. My grandson, my sister, my husband, here, I want you to talk to somebody. All these secrets start to come out from people who didn't think they could share their deep, dark secret. And all of a sudden, now we can meet each other in a very tender place to say, let's really talk about what's going on in our lives. So in that respect, my recovery has also turned out to be my greatest gift.
Yeah. Wow. Were you nervous for bringing that there, or like,
Yeah.
just kind of picturing that, leading up to that?
Absolutely. And what I loved about my recovery meetings was that I didn't tell people what I did for a living. I was just Ben. Hey, I'm Ben, and I'm an alcoholic. We didn't go into job descriptions and none of that. And I did not want people to know that. I just wanted to be Ben, the drunk who's trying to get sober. So, yeah, it was weird, and I never shared it in such a public way. I'm glad that I did, like I said, because it's turned out to be a gift. But yeah, it was daunting. I was very nervous. Yeah.
Yeah. Can only imagine. But it is good, though. I mean, because I think that, like what you mentioned there, right? Everything that can come out of it, it's a big reason for here on the podcast, right? Why we share these stories. One of my big missions too, I think, going into 2025, I got this email from somebody at the end of 24 and going into 25. I'm like, I really want to hone in on sort of my mission, my vision. What do I want this all to be about? And I got this email and I was like, this is exactly what I've been thinking about without the right words for it. And it's so simple, but just this person had sent the email just about normalizing this struggle, normalizing that this is a thing, and not make it this big, shame-filled thing, and just normalizing the conversations. And I think that action that you took and that so many people do in their own ways, in their own careers, their own lives, to say, let's just have a conversation about this. And this is, where I'm at. This is what I'm working on. And I think that's really cool.
Well, and I think I've told people it's a disease. It's like diabetes. When you're diabetic, you're diabetic. You're not going to go eat birthday cake because you're like, that birthday cake is potentially going to kill me. Do you love being diabetic? No. Do you adapt to it and normalize it? Sure. Because, there's all kinds of ways you can live without having to consume sugar. The same is true for drinking. I have a disease that affects, some 8, 10, I forget what the number is, percent of society. And my disease gets activated when I use alcohol. So do I love that I have a disease? No. Does it mean that I can live a very full life having it and carrying it as a chronic condition? Sure. I just have to make sure that I live a certain way, that I don't engage in the thing that will kill me. And alcohol will kill me.
Yeah. So after you did share a little bit that it opened up conversation for topics, maybe not directly related to drinking, but for people to talk with you about stuff. I mean, what would you say though, if somebody came up to you and was like, and maybe this has happened or maybe it hasn't, but I'm struggling with alcohol. Like what would be a response that you would share with somebody?
Me too. I'm allergic to it. Yeah. I mean, I've had people share that. A lot of times it's a loved one is struggling. What do I do with them? And that's an Al Anon question. I can't recommend Al Anon more highly because that's where we learn how to have good boundaries and love each other in healthy ways. But I try to normalize what an alcoholic's life, even with the insanity of it, is for this loved one who's, I don't understand why and I'm going, oh, I understand. I know exactly what they're going through here. And I find that's a ministry that can help people. Of course, pointing people to resources, where do we find meetings, all that. And again, I'm in a church that has a lot of people who are open about their recovery. And so, we probably have 24 on any given Sunday. And so, they are fine with me pointing them out too, to say, hey, there's someone here that will quietly set you up with, and y'all go to lunch or have coffee. And so it's a beautiful way of doing some quiet matchmaking so that we get into the healing space where, as we know, once you share your story and you hear someone else's story, I mean, that's where healing happens, is that we can just be seen and see each other for all of our humanness.
Yeah, that's beautiful to connect people, and so much truth to that. I think too, probably from a lot of loved ones and a lot of people that are going through it, like we feel that sense of being alone. I'm the only person who's going through this, or the only family. And once you get connected and you hear other people's stories of people going through the struggle, but also things improving, for whether it be families or whether it be the person struggling, and it can bring some hope into our life that, maybe, things are going to work out too.
Yeah.
So overall, I mean, have there been some struggles that you've had to work through in the last 3 years?
Yeah, I've had to deal with childhood trauma. I told my therapist that I thought drinking was the big thing I needed to work on. And it turns out drinking was the thing I needed to work on so that I could work on the thing that I really needed, which is childhood trauma. As long as I was drinking, I never had to face the difficulty of a childhood experiences that I've had. Now that I'm sober and have some of the tools to deal with difficult things now, right? I mean, because remember we said that without a program, then you're just sober and it's the same shit. It's just the same, you're just dealing with it and you're still bringing yourself to it. But then when you begin the work of transforming yourself, then you can deal with things in a little bit different way. So now I'm finally in a place to deal with the difficult things, which is, what do I do with the childhood that in many ways had such broken places? So, oh yeah, there's that ongoing piece. There's always the ambition and the drive and I'm a workaholic too, learning to pace myself, learning to prioritize my family better, learning to, it's more than just saying you want to be a good father and a good husband. It's actually showing up and doing it. And those have been ongoing growing edges, if you will. So, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of good things too. And yeah, I mean, I think that's where a lot of people, get with time, right? I have so many different conversations with people that are considering sobriety or already into it, right? And it seems like early on, I mean, it's good, but it's going to be different for everybody, but they're eager to really get down to the nitty gritty. And I'm like, whoa, 2 weeks in, let's just get 90 days without drinking. We don't need to uncover stuff, but it is really good to hear that you're still plugged into the process of the healing journey and everything else that goes into it when the time comes, right? To work on.
But you just named the number one thing that you're right. People want to fix their lives, and it's no, get this drinking thing under control, and it takes time. Let that time set in, and then we can get to those deeper things. But oh yeah, you're 1,000% right.
Yeah, because sometimes I've seen people do it to where they dig into all that stuff, they get into therapy, and things get so overwhelming, and then they're back to drinking again. Because you can't go through all of those different emotions, right? It's already a lot to walk away from drinking. Your lifestyle changing, friends are changing, what you're doing changing, career might change. A lot of changes can happen in first 6 months or so, but it's so cool to hear. Furthering it too, you had mentioned too that you have published. Did you just publish the book?
I did. I did. December of 24. So it's just come out. Published a book called Grace Rediscovered, Finding Hope and Healing Through Recovery. It's a book that's largely about my recovery story. But it's really, people say, what's it about? I would say the easiest way to put it, it's a 12 steps for everybody. My wife, early on, when I was kind of excited about going to meetings and what I was learning and all that, she said, those 12 steps really could work for like people who aren't alcoholics too. And that stuck with me. And so the framework of the book is a lot of it is kind of walks through the steps, especially the first three. What does it mean to kind of work on yourself? That's the character defects and the inventory and all of that. What does it mean to learn about forgiveness? That's steps 8 and 9. What does it mean to have a spiritual life? And part of that is, how do we pray? How do we not put things like work and success ahead of, the things that really matter? That's steps 10, 11. And then, the end of the book is, how do we share this story of healing, our story of healing, with others? And that's step 12. So there's the framework of the steps without being explicit about that. But yeah, it's the 12 steps for everybody. Now, I will tell, for anyone who's interested in it, it does come from a Christian perspective, because I am a Christian pastor. I believe that we all find a higher power. As long as we find a power greater than ourselves to lead us in recovery, you can name that power whatever you need to name it. Now, I do take, because I've just been born and raised in the church, so I take a Christian approach. And I'll say, for those who share my view, the ideas of God and salvation and healing and hope and all these things, they became very different when I experienced recovery. It was like something you always sort of grew up hearing about became very real for me. And so that sobriety date for me means a lot more than just physical sobriety. It's where I became closer to God in a very meaningful way. And so the book really kind of explores, how can we get through whatever existential crisis we're going through, that we're just sick and tired of being sick and tired over, and experience through the framework of these steps and beyond, hope and healing in whatever recovery we need in life.
Yeah, and it's opened up to, be beyond, I guess, just the struggle of addiction, right? Any recovery that you're going
Any
through.
addiction, any workaholism, any, whatever it is that is a thing. Because there's all kinds of things we can be addicted to. We can be addicted to trying to fix other people's problems. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. So yeah, it's addiction in a big sense, but it's how recovery, we all need some element of recovery in our lives.
Yeah, 100%. What motivated you to put this book together?
Partly, I think it was cathartic. Like I said, the dealing with my own wounds, it just felt like I needed to put something in writing. Part of it, my wife, I said, inspired. Part of it is my friend that I mentioned, who said, you've got a story to share. And this kind of became the story I wanted to share, that it's okay to not be okay. And even those among us who appear to have it all and be successful and spiritual and, all of these things, we're not okay all the time. And so it really was, like you said earlier, normalizing being not okay, and then saying, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about how we can all live into some hope and healing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's what it's all about when you come to that spot. And I think maybe that's where some of us get stuck. I think we realize, maybe early on, maybe halfway through, maybe towards the end, that this isn't going to get us to where we want to in life. And this isn't in line with our life. And we got to do something about it. But now we need the tools. We need the know-how of how am I going to get myself out of here? Because we all know that, you brought the kind of the dry drunk thing, and just not drinking is just not going to be the solution. Like that, some people will figure it out. But for a lot of people, I feel pretty safe saying, we're going to need to work on ourselves and get honest with ourselves that we got some work to do to make this an enjoyable process, or else it's just going to be miserable, just like the drinking was. If we don't do anything different, if we just carry on everything else the same.
Yeah. I read somewhere that the most powerful word we can utter is the word help. To ask for help and to have an open hand to receive the help that may be out there. And so it's changed my life, asking for help. I'm grateful to those who've offered me the help. And I hope that this book and the story in it can offer a little help to the dad who's trying to overfunction, to the pastor who wants to be all the things, to the, whoever it may be. And there's hope and healing available, if we move in that direction.
Yeah, 100%. Anything else that we've missed here, Ben, that you want to share?
I for anyone early in recovery, because whenever I just hearing your voice takes me back to some early days of recovery when I was trying to consume everything about sobriety that I could, and podcasts, were a big one. And so anyone early in this journey, I especially just want to tell you are not alone. Many of us have been there. We walk with you in spirit, and just take it one day at a time. That's all you have to do, is just one day at a time, and God will be there with you through it all.
Yeah, awesome. I always love that approach. It keeps things grounded, right? Because we can, like you mentioned there earlier, right? The 20 years, and it's all about just today. I mean, I always look at it too from, I don't know, maybe a weirder perspective, but I'm just like, today's all we got. I mean, tomorrow, you know what? Like, we'll wake up tomorrow, everything's going to be great. But the reality is, like, I don't know that to be fact. So why worry about everything else that I can't do everything about, a year from now, 2 years from now? I wake up every day with the mindset of, I'm just going to do the best I can do today. Some days I do better. Some days I come up a little bit short. Some days I hit the bullseye, but I keep it going.
Yeah. And I also find that living a day at a time like that helps me be more grateful, because I'm not assuming or feeling entitled to tomorrow or the future. I don't have it. And so every day that comes is, oh man, what a gift I have today. And then you wake up the next day and you say, oh man, what a gift. Here we are. It's helped me be more grateful to try to live that way.
Yeah, I love that approach. Since you brought that up, before we go, after this, we'll wrap things up. Gratitude. I mean, did you have that in your life, an element of that, or do you feel it on a deeper level on this journey of sobriety?
Yeah, I would love to say I did have that in my life. And I guess I did to a degree, because, you're a pastor and a professional spiritual person. I did not have gratitude the way that I have it now. And I think I had to learn what it meant to be utterly desperate for something, and to experience, as we hear in recovery promises, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but God leads us there. And I look back at my sobriety, and every day that I'm sober, today makes 1,104 days. I keep a daily in my gratitude journal, a daily count, and I'm 1104 now. Gratitude is so much deeper out of recovery. And I don't know that I could ever know this level of gratitude had I not known the desperation of trying to break free of the addiction, which is also to say to that person who's early in recovery, stick with it, because one day your greatest wound will also be a gift, because it will teach you the most meaningful things in life. It's the paradox of recovery, right? It's the inside outness of it, that somehow the things we're ashamed of, God can transform them into this thing that makes us appreciate life so much better.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Thank you, Ben, so much for jumping on here and sharing your story with all of us.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and more than anything, just to share my story. What a gift it is that we share our stories with each other. I'm grateful for you, by the way, for this podcast. And you have no idea, because I'm one of your listeners, you have no idea how you're helping folks find their way.
Beautiful, man. Thank you. Well, there it is, everyone. Another incredible episode. I'll drop Ben's contact information for Instagram down in the show notes if you enjoyed the episode or could connect to anything that he shared. And I always love when you guys reach out and just let people know thank you. It's not the easiest thing in the world to come on here and in front of everybody kind of in their car or wherever you guys listen to the podcast and share your story. It takes a lot of courage. So I appreciate it so much. Another plug here too at the end of this episode is come and join us in the Sober Motivation community. It's truly incredible. When we step outside of ourselves, we become part of a community, become part of a group where people are just working on getting this thing figured out. We've got people who are starting out and people who've been sober for years. And we've got everything in between. It's a safe place to land. It's a soft place to land. And we want to support you with your goals of not drinking. So if that interests you at all, there's a month for free. Check the show notes, check my Instagram channel, send me an email or send me a message on Instagram with any questions you have. My best piece of advice, though, is just do something. Try something. If things are not working for you, you're not getting the results you want of sobriety, then you have to add more stuff or you have to try something different. We can't continue to do the same stuff and expect the outcomes to be different. So much love as always, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.